Hi guys, this is Keerthana, sports psychologist, and welcome back to the Performance Podcast. We have a very interesting guest here today. We have Mr. Sriram Krishnamurthy, and he's the head coach of the Super Kings Academy, and very interestingly also the ex-batting coach of the New Zealand cricket team. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
So here at the Performance Podcast, we want to break the existing stereotypes and bring in a new narrative towards sports science and speak a lot more, have a lot more of these conversations. So that's what he's going to be helping us out with today. So my first question to you is, as a coach, right? Coach being the most important person for an athlete as a coach, what are the challenges you face? And I'm talking about the sports science perspective with your athletes.
Sure. As you rightly used the word breaking in one of your introductory chats, Keerthana. I think sport as it is has evolved, and over the period of time, I think in India especially, we are currently living in the sporting age. If we'll have to go back maybe up until one generation back, even pursuing sport for a passion perhaps was discouraged,
Yes.
By parents. Whereas now, disturbingly, we are seeing the same set of parents even encourage, athletes
Yes.
to pursue sport at the expense of
Academics.
the academics, right?
Yep.
So from that perspective, it has moved a lot towards sport being seen as a professional opportunity. That in itself is one of the main challenges.
Absolutely.
As a coach, especially at a grassroots level, because ultimately I think the motive for people to play the sport at the very start has shifted.
Absolutely.
Whereas earlier it was about players having dreams and perhaps wanting to pursue those dreams with the knowledge that perhaps it's going to be a hard battle up front in terms of what they are seeking to get to.
Yeah.
Currently, I think it has become a lot more accessible for them in terms of where they think their dreams are, and how perhaps easy they think it is for it to be achieved.
To be getting there.
Correct.
Very true, because every athlete I speak to, if it's a cricketer, then they say their goal, when I ask them the goal, either they say it's an IPL or to play for India, which is a great goal to have. But again, how many people can actually reach there?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And of course, non-cricketer, Olympics, Paralympics, those are the only two things I actually hear. Nothing in between.
Sure.
Right? So that's very true what you rightly pointed out. Now, speaking of the same, how we have a lot of competition now. Times have changed a lot. Earlier, I'm guessing with cricket, you didn't really have too much of S&C or sports science coming into place. It's just more about the cricket skills as such. But now there's a lot of emphasis on sports science, I'm guessing. I think I've seen that shift happening a little bit. What do you think about that with regard to grassroots level?
Rightly so. I think it is important. And the way I think about it is, in a way, I think India is still at the forefront, perhaps, of the volume of people we have. But having been in different other countries and observing how sport is conducted in different other countries, grassroots sport especially, sports science as a support, thing isn't offered to grassroots level, athletes or kids elsewhere in the world. Whereas today in India, I think it's a boon that we have sports science that can be offered to kids even at a grassroots level. Ultimately, I think we need to break barriers, and in a lot of different ways, sports science was seen as something that's more elite.
Yes,
that it cannot.
absolutely.
It's only those elite professionals who can access such support. Whereas, if you're the hardest few steps in sport, if you're really having aspirations and goals, are those first few steps that you take. Because ultimately, if that is going to result in you moving forward, then you're going to be motivated for much longer to pursue your dreams.
Absolutely.
So from that perspective, the challenges that an elite athlete faces is no different from the challenges that a young kid could face. The dreams are the same, the effort is the same. Perhaps more effort needs to be put when you're starting off. And it is sometimes a myth that we talk about the basics. Let's learn the basics, and that will set you up well for any skill-based sport. But ultimately, the basics can still cover different other aspects of the game as well.
True.
And things like S&C, things like mental psych, and all these things, nutrition, for instance. Like these are all. If you're able to give it to them at a younger age, I think it's going to equip them to face the challenges in a far more prepared manner.
Absolutely. I think this is such an interesting perspective because, again, I see people looking at sports science as such a luxury. But to be honest, it's not really a luxury per se, but it's a necessity.
Yes.
Where every child, every athlete, every player, elite or not, should be getting access to at least a perspective, if not access to all the sports scientists. At least the coach needs to be equipped with, that supporting team, right?
100%.
So maybe again, demand supply, I understand that much, but then maybe even educating coaches as such. Do you think that would be an important thing to look at if, let's say, there are not many people working with children, or maybe even children don't have too much time? Because something I've noticed is if they're not going to school, they're going to the training center, and that's pretty much where they spend the entire day. They don't have time to do other things, right? So do you think, or how best do you think people can actually integrate sports science with everyday coaching or everyday training when it comes to grassroots level?
It is a necessity. I think it is a necessity that coaches evolve as well. And what I mean by evolve is they should understand what is out there in the first instance, the different support system, because ultimately when we talk about sport, the one cliche that often comes to mind that you hear a lot of experts talk about is sports prepares you to handle success and failures, right? And of course, in most sport, you fail more often than you succeed.
Absolutely.
So it's a matter of resilience. And ultimately, resilience is not something that's going to be just built by practicing. Right, you need to find the right intervention, be it like and young athlete could break down because of the pressures that he or she is facing. It could be because of the lack of proper nutrition that results in them being able to concentrate less or more.
Absolutely.
And similarly, it could be a fitness related thing, why they might be superiorly skilled, but then they might not be able to execute those skills for long periods of time, which becomes a necessity as well. So from a coaching perspective, I don't think it's as black and white as just thinking that the amount of hours you spend practicing makes you the athlete that you want to be. Ultimately, it's important for coaches to also have a good hang of what is out there, because ultimately I don't think we can be the experts in everything. And when we have the accessibility to people who are experts in different other sports science fields, it becomes ultimately very important for coaches to understand that is available in the first instance, because intervention in coaching, the biggest thing that separates good coaches from maybe average coaches or great coaches is how good they are at intervention.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it is very important that you are able to identify what your athlete is going through. And if you're able to identify and then intervene with providing the right sort of support, not necessarily coming from yourself, but by simply directing them towards the right people, that is effective coaching too.
Absolutely. I think, this is super insightful, because I think what I've seen with my practice too is that a lot of coaches are kind of resistant to getting sports science help. Mainly because I think a lot of coaches also sometimes feel that there are too many people, speaking to the athlete, which means there are too many other directions coming to the athlete as well. So I guess this change in perspective, maybe having that synergy amongst the sports science team and the coach. Like I've worked with many athletes, along with the coach, the athlete manager and the nutritionist, the physio, and together we've like kind of been a part of an Olympic journey or Paralympic journey, and I know how beautiful that can be.
Yes.
And the synergy is, I think that the synergy and openness is something that is very important, I'm guessing, for coaches too, right? To be able to communicate, to be able to actually keep the athlete at the core center. And these are the kind of narratives we want to, kind of start speaking about a lot more, the conversations we want to have. So thank you so much for sharing that very, very insightful, bit. because I think it makes a big difference to acknowledge that.
Of course,
Right?
and I think the way I see it, I think we are starting to see a little bit of shift in that sense.
Absolutely.
And hence why we are able to see a lot more people from a support science perspective be available to young athletes as well.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, I think you said it right. In terms of that synergy, coaches need to understand that the sort of people that we are talking about, the SNCs, the mental conditioning coaches, the nutritionists, are only there to support them in their endeavor to create
exactly
the athlete that they think they want to produce as well. And I think the coaches with the right mindset and the right attitude would not hesitate a minute to take up their services.
Absolutely. So one thing that Harni and I try to build, or at least want to build with the performance doctor, is that we want to build a culture of prehab rather than just rehab. And I know injury is one of the biggest challenges that any athlete would face, or anyone is scared of, even whether they get injured or not. That's a fear that people have, right? So I want to understand from a coach perspective, how important do you think prehab is? We live in an era where everyone comes for rehab, but we want to really shift that. So speaking of that, how important do you think that is?
Very important, Keerthana. I think it starts with the athlete themselves.
Yeah.
Because I wonder, to be honest, even with the academies or noticing different, especially the culture in India, right, where we still place value in the amount of hours we do a certain thing. To know that we are working hard. The concept of working hard is a lot higher here than working smart.
Yes.
Which perhaps is where we need to get to.
Exactly.
And from that perspective, I often question myself if these young athletes understand their body. Or understand their mind even, to basically, because most of the way grassroots sport is sort of structured, it's usually a lot of work during the week which results in competition during the weekend. And by the time you get to the weekend, I often question myself, are these guys actually do they understand if they are playing the game fresh, or fresh doesn't mean just physically but even mentally, right? Because all through the week they are gearing up towards what they need to be doing on the weekend. And that's a lot of mental energy spent too. So I often wonder if they really understand the difference between playing the game when they are fresh as against playing the game when they are under fatigue, right? And I don't think they understand. I don't think if we need to go and speak to a young athlete and ask them if they are fresh, I honestly don't think they would know what fresh is for them to give us a good indication of what that is.
That's true. Yeah, very true.
So from that perspective, I'm an advocate for players and especially young people to understand that there's a lot that they can focus on prior to competition, and prior to perhaps them getting into a phase, rather than react like you say, and only come to seek help when they really need it. And again, injuries could be a result of so many different things. We definitely, I think one thing that we need to acknowledge is there is a lot more chat and awareness around workload management.
Definitely.
For instance, right? And while that is great, that workload management needn't necessarily just be sort of misunderstood to only involve the physical component, right? There could be so many other things that results in injury too. I, for instance, if speaking from a cricketing parlance, if I'm a batter and if I'm scared of facing someone who bowls fast, and then the reality is I go and face that bowler on a weekend, there's every chance that I'm going to get injured, which could put me out of the game for a while. It could put me out of the game forever. The mental scars that leaves in you, or the physical scars that leaves in you, could take you out of the game for a period of time or forever. So I think it is very important that we are able to identify areas that we need to be working on prior to competition or even training phases, rather than just come and seek help when we think that we have hit the wall. And ultimately, I think it's also from a coaching perspective, I think it's important for coaches to acknowledge that as well, because again, there was a time and age when often, right, if you found for something to be difficult physically or mentally, society would just sort of look you down and say, they would belittle you for perhaps voicing that out.
Yes.
And they would just talk about how you need to go through it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very minor and it's a very small line between sort of like, it's not so much about breaking you as much as managing.
Yeah,
so I think that is
definitely.
where coaching has also made a slight shift in the
Okay.
sense that, today I think coaches are far more equipped with the right sort of technology, with the right sort of resources to manage athletes
Yeah.
and not necessarily break them.
Yeah.
Whether it happens, one can argue, but I think we are starting to see a slight shift in that space.
Yeah, and I think it's a great shift to have as well.
It is.
So I'm really glad that, I mean, this is something I never thought of as well. Only as you were talking, I realized, yes, actually a lot of coaches used to pull people out when, they would say, no, I can't do it. And risk of injury would be a lot higher as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, it's very true that the entire thing is shifting and changing, and I'm glad that this is the time sport is also picking up. I'm guessing it's just a loop, right? Because sport is picking up, there's a lot of awareness to make it sustainable as well.
Correct.
And absolutely. I think this is great. Yes. Thank you so much for giving this perspective today, to be with us here today. And yes, I think it's very, to speak of sports science as sports scientists is different from speaking with a coach who works with athletes day in and day out, because as sports scientists, we don't really work with the athletes every single day. Although our work is something that we could do every single day with the athlete. So athlete has a lot more access to the coach. And so getting your perspective and having this conversation has been great. So thank you so much for being here with us today and accepting our invitation as well.
Pleasure, Keerthana. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.